Hello CSE 627, I'm Zevon Smith, and I'm here today to present to you my final presentation. So my unit of study for 5 lessons is called Weather and Climate. The audience for this unit of instruction are my 3rd graders in my contained classroom. They are ages 8 through 9, there's 23 of them, and about 14 are English language learners, which means that they speak English as a second language. The goal for this unit of instruction is based off of a standard from STEM. It is 3-ESS2-1, which stands for Represent Data in Tables and Graphical Displays to describe typical weather conditions expected during a particular season. So the way I broke down this lesson is I decided to think like my students. How do we get weather? What is weather? Asking all those good questions, who, what, when, where, and why. To answer that, I created lessons for those steps. So right now I'm going to introduce to you my first lesson. It is, what is weather? Now, what is weather? Students will be able to gain background and knowledge on what weather is. And so what I designed is the use of Prezi. So the rationale for using Prezi right off the bat in the beginning is because I want my students to get a solid foundation on what weather and climate are and how to know the difference between them. Another reason why I decided to use Prezi in the beginning is because most of my students are not on grade level for reading. I have a lot of English language learners who find words that are tricky and concepts related to content very challenging. I also have a lot of students who are not as interested in reading as other students I've had before. So creating something that is visually stimulating for my students that they can learn from as well as gain information, it was a great reason why I decided to get Prezi right off the bat. The format that Prezi uses this time is a concept map, which is a graphic organizer that I can use with not only English language learners but with students as well in general, just because it helps build that schema of what weather is. So from lesson 1 to now lesson 2, once my students have a better understanding of what weather is, what climate is, and how it's formed, the next step that I thought my students might be curious in is, how do we get weather? So the learning goal in this lesson is students will be able to preview typical weather patterns in a season and be shown how each type of weather forms, and as additionally knowing how weather forms in general. So the rationale for using GoAnimate is similar to Prezi. Once again, I have students who need to learn the content but in an engaging way. GoAnimate provides that visually, and they are introduced to not only concepts but vocabulary as well, which is important for my English language learners and other students in general. Another reason why I like to do GoAnimate as a tool for my students is because most of my students find it very funny. They like to see the cartoon version of me and they're engaging with it. I find that most of my students sometimes need a break from me, and so giving another instructional tool really kind of retains their focus. So once students are able to understand what weather is and how weather is formed, I want students to understand of who studies these forms of weather. So the next step I wanted them to do is to be introduced to a meteorologist. So for the 3rd lesson and its goal, it is students will be able to explore tools and vocabulary as well as concepts about scientists who record weather. So the rationale for using ThingLink for my 3rd lesson is more of a reference tool for students. They are able to access it if they still have the link to my ThingLink at school and at home. So not only are they learning in the classroom, they're also taking that applied information and using it at home with their friends and families. They have that home connection because most students do have TVs in their home, and I'm sure they watch TV and they can switch it to the news once in a while to understand what we see in meteorology. So before students jump in and start creating their own observations and predictions about weather in a certain season of our school year, I wanted them to kind of get a little bit familiar as into why weather is important and why scientists study it. In this lesson, students will be able to view, interact, and form observations about weather internationally. So the rationale for Google Earth is it's a live feed. So students are getting that instant gratification and understanding that the world is continually changing with weather. They can compare and contrast their own temperatures and types of weather to other parts of the world, start to learn how different seasons happen at different parts of the world. So having all that connection helps them correlate to what we experience in our own neck of the woods with weather. So before I introduce the last lesson of this unit, I kind of want to backtrack a little bit so you can see the process of how my unit has been mapped out so far to lead up to this final lesson. So lesson 1 was about what weather is, so learning the difference between weather and climate and all of the definitions it includes. From there, we learn how different weather forms. Once we know how weather forms and what it is, well, we need to know who studies it. We know it's a type of science. So introducing a meteorologist in the study of meteorology is important. Once we know those 3 key steps, now it's time to take it into practice. So having Google Earth and practicing making observations of what is around us is a good setup to this last and final piece, where in lesson 5, students will be able to apply knowledge of weather and weather patterns to daily weather recordings on their own via Twitter. So at this point, I have created my own classroom Twitter page. And in this, my students will be using Twitter daily to show weather throughout the day. And this is done with the hashtag called #WeatherTracker. So basically what I would do in class is teach my students how to use Twitter, how to set it up, and what I'm looking for. So the screenshot you will see is my own version of what I expect students to be sharing online with Twitter. So once that is connected on with Twitter, it becomes a whole class data recording book, essentially online. So the rationale that I wanted to use for Twitter for this final product is it allows me and the students to share documents, give feedback, and make home connection with friends and family inside and outside the classroom. So students are making scientific discoveries and sharing it, and we get to discuss it in class of what's happening outside of the class. So this concludes the journey of weather and climate as my unit. Feel free to click on the links below in the description to explore these tools on your own if you want. Adapt them to the grade level you need. Other than that, it's been a pleasure working with you all and hope to interact with you once again sometime. Thank you. Have a great rest of your term.